Hey everyone, and welcome to the Forgotten History Podcast, where we discuss the history you probably haven't been taught in school. Today, we're kicking off this show with our first ever episode. Anyways, let's get into it. Throughout the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, Western Europe conquered and annexed nearly every part of the world. The one exception to this was East Asia. The largest and most populous of the East Asian powers was China. However, while it was never formally annexed into any European empire, it did have its spats with the West. Arguably the most consequential was the First Opium War, a conflict fought between the British Empire and the Qing Dynasty. To understand the First Opium War, it is essential to first understand Britain's situation preceding the conflict. During the 18th and 19th centuries, China sold many premium goods to the British populace, including silk, porcelain, and tea. Britain, being Britain, always needed more tea. They had recently lost the 13 colonies during the American Revolution, leaving the British treasury in the gutter. Since the Chinese only accepted payment in silver, Britain had to pay in some other way. What was their solution? Simple: hard drugs. To do this, the British East India Company grew poppies, the source of opium, in the British Raj. Then they set up a market for opium in Calcutta, a part of India that's relatively close to China, and let smugglers get the opium across the border, shifting the trade balance in Britain's favor by the 1820s. As it turns out, Indian grown opium is more potent than its Chinese counterpart, which caused its sales to explode. By 1835, over 3 million pounds, or 1.36 million kilograms, were being smuggled into China annually. But wait, there's more. In 1833, the British government allowed for anyone to sell opium. With the East India Company's monopoly on the substance gone, supply soared and prices plummeted, worsening the issue even more. Because of this, by the time 1839 rolled around, nearly 6 million pounds or 2.5 million kilograms of opium were entering China every single year. Think about that. In the span of 5 years, opium sales nearly doubled. With Chinese civilians getting hooked on opium left and right, the Qing Dynasty's society and its economy began to spiral downwards. To combat this epidemic, the emperor appointed Lin Zexu, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. While his efforts saw initial success, the seizure of nearly 1,400 tons of opium being sold by British merchants in the southern city of Canton worsened ties with Britain. Things only got worse when the British government refused to allow British sailors responsible for the death of a Chinese civilian to be tried in a Chinese court of law. In 1839, a naval clash between the two opposing sides just outside of Canton sparked the beginning of the First Opium War. The British Navy sailed to the island of Chusan, located near Shanghai, and sieged it for all of 9 minutes before the Chinese surrendered. During the early days of the war, the Qing government didn't take the onslaught seriously, stemming from a millennia old belief that all non Han Chinese groups were barbarians. This idea quickly faded as the British made swift progress, winning a decisive victory in Canton. This was in spite of the Qing dynasty's army outnumbering their enemy by nearly 8 to 1. The British's success could be attributed to two major factors. First was their superior weaponry, as many Chinese soldiers were equipped with mere spears or outdated guns, while the Brits had much newer firearms. This resulted from China's isolationist policies, which caused the country to miss out on the First Industrial Revolution. Secondly, many British soldiers were veterans of previous conflicts, and thus had more combat experience than their Chinese counterparts. Now, we're about to go through a bunch of dates, so bear with me. On January 7th, 1941, British forces captured the Bogue forts located on the Pearl River Delta in southern China. During this battle, they suffered only 38 casualties and were able to capture 10 of the 13 Chinese vessels present. Despite their numerical disadvantage, they were able to make staggering progress and capture many key cities along the Yangtze and Pearl Rivers. In August of 1841, the coastal city of Amoy was captured. Ningpo fell 2 months later, in October. Chapu, located just south of Shanghai, was sieged in May of the following year. Only 9 Brits died during the battle, and an additional 55 were wounded. On July 21st, 1942, British forces captured Chinkiang whilst suffering only 141 casualties. By August, they had captured Nanking, China's historic capital. This forced the emperor's hand into signing the Treaty of Nanking, conceding Chinese defeat in the war. Qing China had to make three major concessions. Number one, allow Westerners to trade freely in the cities of Shanghai, Ningpo, now known as Ningbo, Amoy, now known as Xiamen, Fuchao, and Canton, now known as Guangzhou. Again, I'm sorry if any of these pronunciations are wrong. Number two, China had to cede Hong Kong to the British Empire. And number three, China had to pay reparations for the war. During the First Opium War, the British Empire suffered a measly 520 casualties, while the Qing Dynasty suffered up to 20,000. China's loss in this war began a period in its history known as the Century of Humiliation, which would last up until the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. During these 107 years, China had to make several concessions to the great powers of Europe as well as Japan, marking a dark age in what was once a proud civilization. So that about wraps it up for what I have to say on the First Opium War. I hope you enjoyed that and learned something new. And remember, as Mark Twain once said, don't let school get in the way of your education. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you next month.